If you've played Citadelle Day more, you will have no doubt heard a lot of talk about a new character known as the Owl, and if you've progressed far enough through the main quest, you will have even spoken to an ethereal echo of him. This character is incredibly mysterious, having only a few lines of dialogue in the map. However, from what little we do know, there is a lot you can piece together about this shadowy figure that may even have far-reaching implications for the rest of the storyline going forward. Especially the next map, Dig Site. Today, I'd like to dive deeper into the life of this enigmatic figure, the man who destroyed the Templar Order he served in for years, the man who would set up Avalon's bloody history, the man who would perhaps even set the Chaos storyline from Black Ops 4 in motion. Guy de Saint-Michel, better known to history as the Owl. In order to understand the man who would become the Owl, we first need to understand some context about the Crusades and the knights who fought in them. In the First Crusade, lasting from 1096 to 1099 AD, established the Kingdom of Jerusalem in the Middle East, with Catholic forces from various European nations, sanctioned by the Pope, conquering the lands that had been occupied by Muslims for hundreds of years. Following this, in 1119 AD, a new knightly order was established to protect Christian pilgrims to the region, the Order of the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Templar of Solomon, more commonly known as the Knights Templar. In the following centuries, many crusades would follow, with lands being conquered and reconquered back and forth. All the while, the Knights Templar grew into not only the most popular military order, but the wealthiest by far. During the following century, they would engage in many conquests around the region, including arranging with the armies of the King of Jerusalem into Egypt, near the location of the pyramids themselves. One of the most controversial occurrences of the Crusades was the sack of Constantine, the capital of the Greek-speaking Byzantine Empire. These are both worth mentioning. The Templars began to wield serious military and political power throughout Europe, being able to cross borders as they pleased, having numerous temple houses in every country where their members could reside, and even growing to possess members of their order with influence on the legal systems of Europe, and continue to grow their wealth through the looting and plundering of artifacts and treasures. This was tolerant for some time, as the might of the Templars was key in maintaining the territories in the Middle East. However, as the Muslim world unified under the likes of Saladin and successfully began to push out the Crusader forces, the Templars became purposeless. This greatly worried those in power across Europe, as the Templars were an incredibly large, exceptionally wealthy international army with no allegiance to any one country, and the ability to manipulate the courts in any country they resided in through their well-connected members. This situation could not last. By 1291, the Crusader kingdoms began to fall, with the new Templar Grand Master, Jacques de Molay, trying to find support for more military action wherever he could, including seeking out Hashleju Khan, grandson to Genghis Khan, as a potential ally. This was necessary as, by this point, the Templars had been pushed all the way out of the mainland and had to found a new headquarters on the island of Cyprus. This period is key, as judging by the age of the man, this is likely the period of time in which the Owl served in the Templar Order. He may have even been a direct comrade of Grand Master de Molay himself. If the Owl was just an ordinary Templar though, we wouldn't be discussing him. During this period of time, he did two important things. The first was to father his 4 bastard sons. We know this as they were already fully grown, capable enforcers when he fled to Avalon in the 1310s. Secondly, and likely more importantly, in the Owl's opinion, he became the most knowledgeable individual on Earth in all things mystical, which would be a vital step in what was to come. But we'll discuss how exactly he did this in more detail later. And I have already posted an in-depth video going over the bastard sons, as they were abandoned and never recognized by the Owl, and their potential connections to the original crew. Regardless, we know very little about the Owl's life for the next 2 decades, other than that he became renowned throughout the elite in Europe as the expert on all things occult. It needs to be said here too that, at least as far as the powers that be were concerned, he was a positive figure. For reasons that would become obvious soon, then, it was vital that he, as an esteemed knight of the Templar Order, was seen to be wholly in all of his duties.
Seguida Saint Michel, known to most as the Owl, the man who may have single-handedly destroyed the legendary Knights Templar. He was the leading expert of his day in all matters occult. His prowess in the dark arts won him his knightbird sobriquet. That reputation made it easy to accuse the Templars of heresy, and while their leadership was burned at the stake, the Owl escaped to Avalon. But he would have never succeeded without his bastards. 4 sons who stopped at nothing to win his favor. Their true names are lost to history, but their noms de guerre still inspire fear and hatred. The Stag was his shock trooper, striking like lightning when least expected. The Dragon's scorched earth tactics betrayed his reptilian lack of mercy. The Lion was the brightest of the 4, always keen to please his master. And the Raven, like his father, was a creature of the shadows. And although they served him faithfully, the Owl would never acknowledge their birthright, much less knight them. Nor would he give them what they desired most: love, respect, recognition. They were useful as thugs, enforcers. Sadly, all relationships, even those built on love, respect, and recognition, will break in time. But the Bastard's reign of terror in what would become Avalon echoed through the ages, giving rise to the French Syndicate.
And if the public knew he was a regular petitioner of black magic for the sole purpose of foreshadowing his own ends, he would have been immediately tried and burnt at the stake as a heretic. And that could also be potentially why he never recognized his sons, which hurt them immensely because he had them with many different wives out of wedlock, which would have been damning to his reputation. So perhaps he instead positioned himself as a sort of exorcist, or benevolent wise master, knowledgeable in the dark arts, but only so that he could help his order identify real practitioners of dark magic. Alternatively, perhaps he shared his knowledge with the most powerful people around, forming a sort of occult society who would have enough political sway to protect one another if ever there were accusations against them. Sound familiar? According to Kraft, Guy was the leading expert of his day in all matters occult. His prowess in the dark arts won him his Nightbird sobriquet, which explains where his name, the Owl, comes from, as these birds are often associated with wise, knowledgeable figures. Regardless, the hour of the Owl was at hand, and in 1314 he changed the course of history. Finally fed up with the looming presence of the Templar Order, the nobility of France arrested Jacques de Molay, extracted a confession from him about the order being secret heretics, though it is likely he was forced into confessing this and was actually innocent, and burnt to death in Paris. As Professor Kraft informs us, however, it was actually the Owl's word as an expert on such matters that sealed the fate of his former commander, and ultimately caused the destruction of the entire Templar Order. He was seemingly in Paris during this ordeal, but quickly fled to Avalon along with the bastard sons and began his reign of terror, all while his former comrades were hunted mercilessly by the forces of the Church and the European powers. Now we have all of this historical context, and before we discuss what the Owl planned to do next, we should examine one final piece of the puzzle that suddenly allows everything else to click into place. From the official Season 1 Reloaded blog, we get the following passage detailing the immediate aftermath of this event. 1314 AD, Relic of the Templars. Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, is burned at the stake for heresy in Paris. Surviving members of the Order scramble to hide relics gathered during the Crusades. A lone knight rides south, carrying Redacted, once owned by Abdul Redacted, said to be able to Redacted, and even capable of Redacted itself. Once at the keep, using a ritual learned from Redacted, he, Redacted, and Guy de Saint-Michel, along with his 4 enforcers, ruled Redacted, the descendants now Redacted. Obviously, such Redacted is considered apocryphal. There is a lot of information in this passage that has been redacted, which is quite annoying to read, as I just did. However, if we go line by line, using some of the context we discussed and some outside knowledge, we can make sense of a lot of this, although it would have been much better to get this information in-game ourselves, but nevertheless. Where it says Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, is burned at the stake for heresy in Paris, this is real-world history, and thanks to Craft, we are fully aware of the Owl's role in this event, although obviously not in the real world. Where it says surviving members of the Order scramble to hide relics gathered during the Crusades. As we had already discussed, the Templars looted widely during the Crusades, hoarding many artifacts across the world that brought them great wealth. But this actually coincides with a quote Craft can say during the main quest, in which he says the Templars were notorious for hoarding relics, with what he is referencing to here being the Ankh, Horseshoe of Pegasus, Raven's Talon, and Paladin's Brooch. These relics in particular are clearly from different cultures, with the Ankh being Egyptian, claimed by the Templars possibly during their campaign into Egypt. The Horseshoe of Pegasus possibly from the sacking of Constantinople. Craft comments on the Raven not being normal, and so it is likely a product of the artifact itself. Ravens most commonly being associated with Odin, and therefore perhaps being a personal belonging of a Scandinavian member. Similarly, the brooch is said to be belonging to a paladin, who were allegedly the 12 knights of King Charlemagne's court. At the time, the Franks, predecessors to the French, had only relatively recently converted to Christianity at large, so it is likely the brooch was pagan in origin, possibly being associated with a Celtic god such as Danu. These artifacts are related to the Chaos storyline, and potentially after Pegasus was defeated on Ancient Evil, its horseshoe was collected and ended up here in Citadelle Day More. The next sentence, a lone knight rides south carrying Redacted, once owned by Abdul Redacted, said to be able to be redacted and even capable of Redacted itself. Easily the most mysterious and interesting line in the entire passage. This is the line that serves as the key to everything. Though speculation, it is possible that the person mentioned is Abdul Alzarad, a character from H.P. Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, which of course was heavy inspiration for the Apothecans from Shadows of Evil onwards. What significance is this? Abdul Alzarad, in Lovecraft stories, is the author of the Necronomicon, an incredibly powerful and evil book of magical knowledge, written by Alzarad after journeying through the ruins of ancient Babylon and the tombs of Egypt in around 750 AD. Shortly after authoring this book, he died mysteriously. Eventually, it was translated into Greek in the Constantinople. In Lovecraft lore, its fate after this point to modern day is unknown, but here in our story, it is entirely possible it came into the hands of the Crusaders during the aforementioned sack of Constantinople, and later the hands of the Templars themselves. Therefore, the first section would read, a lone knight rides south, carrying the Necronomicon, once owned by Abdul Alzarad. As for the abilities in the next line, we can't say for sure. However, the next line possibly relates to the main quest. Once at the keep, using a ritual learned from Redacted, he redacted. The first redacted here would be the book, or perhaps Necronomicon. This is incredibly interesting, as it would imply the hidden book we have to restore during the main quest that contains 4 symbols is, in fact, this cursed book. This is possibly confirmed through the use of the word ritual, as in the quest, we have to go to the specific points of power, essentially sites empowered by rituals, and kill zombies there. What makes this even more interesting is that the book is secured by a grid of alchemical symbols, near identical to the ones found in Delphi during the Chaos storyline, by which Shaw was infamously killed by Bruno and resurrected by the door. And Guy de Saint-Michel, along with his 4 enforcers, ruled Redacted, the descendants now Redacted. Obviously such Redacted is considered apocryphal. This final section likely just tells us that they ruled over Avalon, and the descendants are now the French Syndicate, something confirmed in the map. Later in the timeline within the blog post, we read that the land was given by the Pope to a powerful family in the area who would become the French Syndicate. But given that Franco outright says in a piece of intel that they are the descendants from him, it's likely that the French Syndicate lost the de Saint-Michel name as a result of the bastard sons never being officially brought into the family by their father, thus the name being somewhat lost to time. meaning that these bastard sons seemingly continued their bloodline, but there were potentially even more members out there. Who knows how many kids he had? And if there are ties to the original crew, that is an interesting point to make as well, because their descendants could still be among us. With all of this information, we can put together a really interesting theory, starting all the way back with Alzarad in the 700s. He was a poet and scholar, perhaps somewhat like Kraft, who effectively stumbled upon ancient knowledge in the Middle East. Egypt specifically is extremely relevant here, as it's possible that the knowledge he stumbled across was that of the Order from the Chaos storyline, and even of Cortifex. The Order were based in Egypt at the time of the early Roman Empire, as we see in 9. However, the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD may have had catastrophic implications for them. It's possible that Alzarad rediscovered their lost knowledge and transcribed it in his book, preserving some, though perhaps not all, of the knowledge of the Nine. In the main quest, one of the symbols we collect in particular bears a striking resemblance to the Dark Ether rune of Cortifex the Deathless, though it's not exact. So it's entirely possible that he also stumbled upon Cortifex's temple, or perhaps even the Order possessed writings on the Dark Ether god. In the map, there is a demonstrable link between these two sources of knowledge, as not only is the Owl's magic able to manipulate the Dark Ether directly, we see this for example with Balmung, the Sword of the Raven, but he also regularly utilized the aforementioned alchemical symbols in the exact same way as the Order did, with the opposite sword, Solace, that of the Lion, utilizing magic drawn from these symbols. It's also worth noting here that the elements we use are unusual, but not unfounded for Zombies players. Fire, electricity, light, and shadow are the 4 elements of the Boson de Eisendrache 2, and more importantly, the 4 basic elements according to both the Apothecans and Keepers. We even see this in the Revelations main quest, with the runes of creation being for these 4 elements. While the 4 elements theory was traditionally accepted in alchemy, this is a very abnormal choice of elements. The real world standard was water, earth, fire, and air, and so again suggests higher knowledge of the Dark Ether. As we see in the Owl's study, he knows of the alchemy and clearly of the Dark Ether, as the Void Sword makes a direct tear to it, and he even has some drawings seemingly studying Ethereum crystals. Unfortunately, we can't really make out the text clearly on the piece of paper, but maybe we'll get a closer look in the Digside DLC map. The important thing to take is that the Owl has esoteric knowledge of both alchemy and the Dark Ether. Could this particular crystal even be on the Digside map itself? These crystals do much more than hold energy and life essence. Maybe there's an argument that the red crystals we saw in Vanguard is blood Ethereum, or one and the same with Prima Materia. We shall see. Anyways, by the time the Templar Order was failing, the Owl had likely been in many losing battles, possibly even seeing people important to him perish and becoming extremely jaded. If, in these 2 decades, he then came across this book of knowledge in some dusty Templar vault, he would very quickly become extremely powerful. As I hinted at earlier, he possibly bought himself powerful friends with this knowledge, ensuring he could never be accused of heresy himself. He would likely be totally ideologically opposed to the Templars as a result of this knowledge, believing now that only he knew the truth about the world, and that their religion was false. When the time was right, he sprung, accusing the old commander of heresy and escaped to Avalon, where he would occupy the Citadelle and fortify it with dark rituals from the book. Kraft states during the quest that he has no inherent power himself, he's just harnessing the power within the Citadel. The knowledge of the Owl obtained was so great that he was able to create a form of life itself, a golem made of stone, the Guardian, whose only task was to protect what he considered his greatest creation, the Obscurus Altilium, a powerful amulet, the purpose of which ties directly into the Sentinel artifact. Whilst we're not entirely sure of the amulet's exact purpose, Kraft's warning seemed to suggest that, without the amulet, the Sentinel artifact will harm us in some way.
Kraft, we need to know, what do we do with the amulet?
Take it to the excavation site, but beware the Sentinel artifact. It could consume you.
One theory is that it is actually a piece of the artifact itself and will be needed to complete the trial on the dig site map. Another theory is that the trial will almost certainly destroy whoever begins it without the amulet, a sort of failsafe employed by the owl, which is why Craft warns that it will consume you, and it is dangerous. We can come to this conclusion because of a simple fact. The owl's study was never opened and the amulet was actually never obtained. If we are attentive in the main quest, we notice that the owl intended his sons to acquire their swords through incredibly difficult challenges. Furthermore, when we play the Mystic recording, which is an imprint left by the owl, similar to the spectral reflections from the machine, it was clearly intended for one of his sons, who he assumes has betrayed and murdered his brothers in order to reach their study. The owl says this son is his favourite, not actually naming them, which likely means he doesn't really know or care which son succeeded, and he talks in a similar manner during the boss fight. Again though, the amulet was never actually obtained, as we are the first ones to not only acquire it, but even to reach the secret study. This means, potentially, that the brothers collectively realised how evil their father was and teamed up, possibly to take on the Sentinel trial themselves. The only problem here is if indeed the amulet is some sort of failsafe for the trial, the brothers may have been stuck in an active trial for thousands of years, similar to Medusa and Perseus on Ancient Evil, or may have actually perished in the trial, in the location for the dig site map. It's possible that, while he undertook incredibly harsh and cruel methods, he did so to try and ensure that one son would be strong enough to take on the Sentinel trial, and only through being as cruel as his father would he reach this level. By the time he made the Mystic recording, the owl was likely very old, as it appears his tomb is actually in the study, or at the very least, a smaller model of it is, with the actual tomb being in the dig site itself. Despite his magic, the owl would not have been physically strong enough to face the undead horde, just like Strauss or Craft, and so perhaps in his mind, he needed one incredibly strong, ruthless warrior to manage it for him after he was gone. But the purpose of this is uncertain. This is just speculation, but perhaps the amulet is even some way for the owl to attempt to possess the son from beyond the grave after completing the trial, allowing him to cheat death. In which case, our characters would need to be extremely careful in the next dig site map. As we do see on the preview image of this map within the intel, an overview of it, of which we see what looks to be the owl's head buried in the rock that is being excavated. And this seems to match up with the smaller tomb that we see in the study. With the fact that the Guardian comes to life from a statue, I wonder if he could even be the final boss or something like that on this map if it is brought to life. But that means we're going to learn a lot more about the owl on this next map, as he is going to be an integral part of it. Initially I thought this could be the Janus god, but it is very clearly the owl, so apologies for that. A last interesting area of discussion is what happens after the owl's death. We know from Vanguard Zombies that during the Middle Ages, the Societe Occult began to form, consisting of incredibly rich and powerful individuals from all over Europe, with their centre seemingly being in France. I've already strongly implied this in the video, but I think it's incredibly possible that the Owl is the founder of this organisation, perhaps intentionally, perhaps unintentionally. What is interesting though, is it seems like the Societe Occult were nowhere near as powerful as the Owl is/was, as the most significant thing we know of them doing is summoning the Dark Ether entities to try and glean some small pieces of knowledge. Given the Owl's book, which is perhaps the Necronomicon and the source of most of his knowledge, which was securely locked away in the keep, those who knew of him and wanted to follow in his footsteps had far less information to go on, leading to the very slow, gradual compilation of the Tome of Rituals, which we know from Vanguard intel was pieced together over centuries. Perhaps some scraps were legitimate pieces from the Owl's collection of knowledge, but it was certainly nowhere near as thorough. I've speculated previously, and I've seen a lot of other people speculating, that Necronomicon could actually be the Tome of Rituals, but maybe it's just a much less powerful version, like I speculated. Similarly, in the Chaos storyline, the modern incarnation of the Order was a splinter group from a far more established and modern society. I believe that this could have been the Societe Occult, which by the early 1900s was probably at their least impactful. Perhaps the High Priest of Chaos sought the lost knowledge of the Owl from its original source, the Library of the Nine, and traveled to Egypt, Babylon, and other such places where their authentic traces could be found. Regardless, the Owl's influence on these secret societies seems obvious. All of this leads to one question: what did the Owl want with the Sentinel artifact, and what exactly is buried at the dig site? Will we find the bones of the Owl there, or perhaps even the bastard sons in some kind of tomb? Like I said, there is a statue of him, but that is likely not him himself. or does Sagai de Saint Michel have one final rabbit of betrayal waiting for us there? So many questions to pose, and I'm really looking forward to this next map and learning much more about the Owl. Potentially, after that map releases, we can do another big recap on the Owl storyline once we have more concrete answers. I am hoping we get some more solid information on his potential ties with the Chaos storyline and the Order, as well as the Vanguard zombie storyline with the Societe Occult, and the blurrings of the lines between all of these, because right now, we can only make inferences, and I hope that these questions get solid answers eventually, because the pile of unanswered questions in the Dark Ether story just seems to be growing and growing and growing, whilst the pile of answered questions is barely mounting. But anyways, hopefully you have enjoyed this video. On screen right now will be a link to my video going over the Bastard Sons and their connection, since it's very relevant, of course, to this video as well, and I think that'll be a lot of fun for you similarly. Without further ado, plenty more lore videos to come. Thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not here for latest and greatest Call of Duty news and information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.